Hello everyone and welcome to the Bronze Age, a massive overhaul mod by Svanley for Imperator ROME that's just recently been updated with a huge amount of content. Now this is an excellent mod with an interesting spin on familiar mechanics that fundamentally reworks the game and also adds an entirely new expanded religious system that adds a significant amount of depth, strategic choice and immersion to how you play. So in this video I'll be detailing all of the major features in the mod and discussing my time with it, so let's begin. So the first big overhaul is obviously the map itself. The Bronze Age map is focused on the eastern Mediterranean coastlines wrapping around Greece and continuing along the Anatolian coastline, Syria, Egypt and Libya, as well as a large portion of the River Nile. There's currently just under 5,000 territories in total and around 570 individual countries. Now just for a size comparison, in the vanilla game, the island of Crete is made up of 10 territories. In the Bronze Age mod, the island of Crete is made up of 90 territories, so we're massively scaled up here for this focused in area. The start date of the mod is January 2115 BCE, which is just over 1,800 years before the vanilla start date of Imperator Rome. So we're talking about 4,000 years ago from present day. As such, unless you're particularly well versed with Bronze Age history, there's probably not that many countries that you're really going to recognize. Now I was initially drawn to Troy, but I realized quickly it's not quite the Troy I had imagined, as we're about 1,000 years before the Iliad. And not only that, but I've since learned that the Trojans may not have even been Greek at all. I never actually knew that until quite recently. It's pretty interesting to read about. Now, as such, the Trojans in this mod are Welesan in culture and Luwian in religion, and there's nothing terribly distinct about them compared to their neighbors, so I ended up playing Knossos. Let's talk about the next big overhaul, and that's religion. Religion in the Bronze Age is massively overhauled. First off, you can now create dedicated holy sites on territories. If it's a city, you can build either a temple or a shrine, but if it's just a settlement, you can only build a shrine, and you can also only build a shrine if the territory isn't adjacent to one already, so you have to have them a little bit spread out. So what do? Well, a temple will give a modifier to research, civilization level, conversion, and assimilation speeds, so it's pretty good for the city. A shrine will have a direct increase to research, as well as conversion speed and happiness for freemen and tribesmen, so it's also pretty good. Now the big distinction is that temples are seen more as a government institution, while shrines are seen more as something for the people. And both of them have their own progression, as does every religious site that you build. Now the progression is called prestige. Over time, prestige rises with the size of a territory, so long as you have the right pop class in there. So it's citizens for temples, and freemen and tribesmen for shrines. Now if you have too much of the wrong class, then the temple's prestige will start to decay. You can also arrange a festival or a ceremony at a shrine or a temple, which gives it a 5-year boon to happiness and prestige. So why are you doing this? Well, other than the buffs to the territory itself, you can actually see a ranking of the most prestigious religious sites in the world, and if you're in the top 5, you get nationwide buffs to conversion speeds and output. You also get ranked by your religion, when all the prestige is counted up of all the territories where it's dominant, not just within your lands. So right now, my religion is Aegean, and we're well behind the Levantine religion, but if we were to capture some Levantine sites and convert them, we'd gain up in the rankings, and this essentially allows you to wage ancient religious warfare if you wanted, which is pretty neat. Another benefit of having a prestigious religious site is that you can give your king a grand crowning. This gives you an immediate boon to legitimacy, popularity, and some political influence. And as mentioned, there's just several buffs that you won't want to ignore that help your nation globally, as well as the individual territory buffs that come along with the shrines and the temples. So remember I said that temples are seen more as a government institution while shrines are seen more as something for the people? Well, that's because they directly tie to either the government or the people, and this is represented with two currencies called religious decentralization points and religious centralization points. There's also just regular religious centralization, and this isn't a currency, this is just a metric. Now I know the naming conventions are a little bit weird here, but just bear with me. Now essentially you have two religious tradition trees that are split between decentralized on the left and centralized on the right. For every temple you have, your centralization will trend upwards. For every shrine you have, it will trend downwards. As your centralization trends downwards, you earn more decentralization points, which you can then spend on the left-hand side of the tree. Each time you get a tradition, you then increase the cost of the next one you need by 25. If your centralization trends upwards, then you'll earn more centralization points, which you can spend on the right-hand side of the tree. Now, what you could do is keep centralization somewhere at 50, and you'll earn an equal amount of points in both trees, allowing you to progress down the chains evenly, but effectively at half the speed in each. It's a super interesting approach to a tradition tree with some very powerful buffs in it. On the right hand side, you have major buffs to character loyalty, province loyalty, popularity, legitimacy, tax, build costs, and stuff like that. On the left hand side, you have food modifiers, happiness, promotion speeds, conversions and assimilations, and things like that. It's an interesting duality between managing the people and managing the state. Now, you can always convert temples into shrines, but you can never remove shrines completely, unless you build a city on top of it. Only then can you convert a shrine into a temple, so it's an interesting balance to decide what you want to specialize in. Then factoring in conquest, you'll be taking on more shrines and temples from the territories that you gain, and you'll have to work out your balance. Now, something you can do to tip the scales is if your ruler dies and you've already built the royal tombs at your capital, you can also choose to inter them in a tomb, which will help centralization trend upwards depending on the amount of rulers that have been buried. It really is a great progression system that's different to any other in the game currently, but one drawback would be not having an easy way of knowing where you've built your shrines or temples. A map mode showing where temples and shrines are is severely needed with this system, as once you start growing, it's really hard to manage where they are. I would actually list this as an extremely high priority, as it does become very tedious very quickly, flipping through the territories, as you'll frequently want to enable festivals or ceremonies on your religious sites and maybe even convert them when the system isn't really trending your way. I'd also rename it. It's kind of confusing having 3 separate centralization numbers, and it's also confusing that you can progress both decentralized and centralized at the same time. Considering these words are already used in the policies screen, I just try to rename it something else. I mean, even something like local religion power versus state religion power, and then keeping the centralization name for the one that can go up or down, that might work a little bit better, maybe. One other interesting side note I haven't fully explored yet with the religious system is that the final tradition on the decentralized side is to get oracles. And then you can place an oracle on a sanctuary, which is an upgraded shrine, and you can then consult the oracles about what the future may hold. Now, I actually don't know what this does, but I'm very interested to see it, as it's just a super cool idea from an immersive perspective. Oh, and the last thing that I glanced over is that omens are now randomized, and this is why you can only see the one call omen button instead of the list of omens as usual. And this is actually how it was in Europa Universalis Rome, where you just kind of roll the dice on an omen and hope to get what you want. Now, personally, I actually prefer this, but people who don't like RNG, it might turn you off. In EU Rome, it actually could also give you a negative omen, but the omens in the Bronze Age mod at least are all still positive, so there's no drawback to just chancing one. You can't predict what you'll get, but you'll get something positive at least. So the next big overhaul would be city development. Now, in the Bronze Age mod, you can do several extra things to develop cities further, and there's 3 slots to do this. There's a port slot, which can be upgraded 5 times, a royal palace slot, which can be also upgraded 5 times, and as mentioned, you can build royal tombs, which is only ever built once at your capital to house your previously deceased rulers if you want. Now, the port, which is pretty straightforward, basically just increases recruitment speed for ships, import routes, and commerce value, while the palace is a little bit more complicated. A palace will also increase import routes, loyalty, pop capacity, and tax, but it also requires the palatial law to be passed each time you want to upgrade further. This is a special law category that is linear in progression, each one being a step above, that basically increases your diplomatic capabilities, but also lets you improve your palaces. Now, the Imperial Palace, the final stage, can only be constructed once you have 80 territories or more and enact the law. So it's an interesting kind of side progression. The palaces can be built in any city, not just your capitals, so it's a nice sort of government development project that you can choose to do. Now, if I was just to be a little bit nitpicky when it comes to the laws screen, first off, it looks awesome. There's so many more laws, and the UI just fits really seamlessly. It's really neat, compact, it doesn't feel too cluttered. I really enjoy the screen itself, and also, the laws themselves are excellent. There's really high-powered buffs, but they come with big drawbacks, so it's all about whether or not you can take them on and balance them and manage them. I really enjoy it, and they've removed the stability hit that you take with changing a law, because there's so many now that you just pay the influence costs, which I think is also great. However, there are a couple of categories of laws which are just linear progression, so it's like every single law just gets better and better as you progress through the chain, and they might have milestones locked behind them, like hit this certain you know, technology advancement, hit a certain amount of territories, or whatever the case might be, and you just get the next progression. And while progression is really nice and it feels really good to do those upgrades, I just don't feel like it really fits within the laws screen itself, because you're not making choices about it. It'd be much better if it could somehow fit as a government development button somewhere in the government screen. It's like, hey, you hit this milestone, click this button, and you're up to the next level now, and you still get that same reward, and then you'd have more room left over for more interesting laws. It's just a little nitpick. The author did ask me to kind of point out or give him some feedback about certain things, so I thought it'd be worth doing it while I have the platform to do so. But it is, like I said, a nitpick. This is not a big thing. The gameplay still works just fine. Now, tangent over, if you're playing Egyptian, this is where development projects get a little crazy. On a given territory, you can choose to build a funerary complex site, which unlocks 3 build slots. Now this can only be done once every 50 years somewhere, so you'll want to choose your site carefully. These 3 build slots can have a pyramid or a mortuary temple built on them, and they're done in many stages. For the sake of the video, I just didn't have the time or the means to make a pyramid, as it just takes twice as long as the mortuary temples. Now the smallest pyramid will take 16 years. You actually get options on which size of pyramid you want to build. So the smallest one is 16 years just to get the basic foundations down. So I ended up just going with the mortuary temples instead, as they're basically the same thing, but pyramids are just way more involved and hard to build. So, long story short, the mortuary temple is built in 4 stages at the foundation level. It requires 3 stone and 4 fine stone in the province to build, so you have to source the materials and import them. Then, when the foundations are in place, you can build on one of the 4 burial sites, building a tomb to house your royal dead. And this also costs a pretty big sum of money and requires 2 fine stone, 2 precious metals, and 2 natron. I think it's called natron. Again, these things aren't easy to source, and they're even harder to build up surpluses to import them. And it takes just a long time of progression and building pops in the world to do it. Now once that is done, your tomb is then built and it'll house 3 dead. Now unlike the royal tombs of the non-Egyptians, the royal tombs in the funerary complex take in everyone from the royal family that dies, not just the ruler, and they're interred automatically rather than it being something that you have to pay for. For Egypt, this raises your dynastic prestige, which is a unique to Egypt feature, basically something that you just build up over time, but the older your dynasty, the more it begins to decay, and you offset this with building tombs. Now keeping it high gives you a small loyalty bonus to everyone, but letting it fall low gives you a really punishing penalty to loyalty, so it's something that you want to keep an eye on. Now you can actually see the other dynasties as well with a claim to Egypt, but it doesn't currently really affect anything, though I believe in future it may benefit you to be the only claimant according to the mod author. Now I love this feature. I think it's a really interesting mechanic to add to Egyptians for this time period. Now if I had a little bit of feedback, again, it'd be that workforce doesn't seem to be an actual factor within the construction of the pyramids or temples. Granted, I didn't get to the end of the pyramid chain, so not 100% sure what's actually there. But for the mortuary temples at least, I thought it would be cool if it increased your slave ratio while it's under construction, or maybe it could just be sped up a bit if you had a lot of slaves, because it does take really long to do. Also, when it is finished, there was no migration attraction or benefits to the province, other than obviously the dynastic prestige that you get yourself, but it seemed like maybe it should have raised the profile of the province a bit, you know, it's kind of like a big monument, but I don't know. But these are really small nitpicky things, as I said. I was really impressed with the feature in general, and I think it adds a lot of flavor to playing Egyptian, and it's just like a fun thing to do as a side project. So those are the biggest features out of the way, but you may have also noticed that I mentioned different buildings, laws, trade goods, and you might have spotted a few different unit types, and that's because all of that stuff is overhauled as well. It's a bit too involved to go through it all completely. This video would just blow up to like an hour long, but buildings in general have all had their values changed, and they've had some new ones added. And this changes how you build, and most of all, the ratios and breakdowns of pops. Now, I'm not sure if I played incorrectly, but I felt like there was way less slaves in the game compared to normal, but much more tribesmen in general, which is, you know, given the early stages of civilization here, I guess it makes some sense. Now, generally, the building system feels the same to use, but it also adds more resource-specific buildings, like hunting camps for the fur resource and wild game, logging camps for wood, shipyards if there is a port, fisheries if there is a coastline, plantations for certain types of food, farms for certain types of terrain. So basically the building is a lot more varied, and it's a lot more reflective of the territory that you're building on. But at the same time, it's also a lot more straightforward, which I'm not sure if it's a good thing or not. Like some settlements, it just felt like there's really only one option, given the circumstances of the terrain or the resources. So in those cases, it felt boring. But other times you had to choose between either a farm, a mine, or a fishery, maybe because it was an open field for the farm, stone as a resource for the mine, and it was coastal, so you could build a fishery. So those were where it was most interesting and at its best, when I felt like there was some choice to it. Now for me, the real building system comes with stuff like the pyramids, actually using resources to put together something. It felt so much more rewarding, but I'm a little bit biased there as I have been asking for that kind of feature since launch, you know, the idea of combining resource goods to create a building. And then I'd like to take it further where if you lose the goods in the province, then, you know, the building's output would go down. A man can dream. Now, speaking of trade goods, there's now a few new ones, most notably copper, which is used to make axemen units, and tin, which is a super rare resource used for research. Now, some have also been removed, like marble and glass, but replaced with similar counterparts like fine stones and ivory. When it comes to the units in the game, there's 7 classes of unit: archers, axemen, chariots, horse archers, light cavalry, skirmishers, and spearmen. The standard cohort is also 300 in size, which I actually much prefer in terms of scale personally, but the pace of battles feels pretty much the same as well. Now the last thing I want to cover is colonization. An interesting thing with the map is how much uncolonized territory there is. Taking Crete as an example, about 1/5 of the island is just uncolonized in random pockets. And if we look at the Peloponnese, again, about 1/5 isn't claimed. Now normally colonization is a bit of a pain to work with. You move pops around until you get enough culture to spread to the next area over, but in the mod it works completely different. In order to colonize an adjacent territory, you just pay 900 manpower and 20 political influence. Then it's considered in progress for a year, and you can't colonize another territory adjacent to that one until it's done. So basically, you pay your fee, you wait a year, and then you pay again to keep colonizing outward from it. Now, if you want to do it a bit faster, you can instead enact the Trade Post Law, which allows you to use armies to colonize territories instantly with no 1-year cooldown. But this still costs 900 manpower, same as before, but now it also costs 150 gold instead of the 20 political influence. Then you can kind of colonize out from that area using the other method more quickly. There's just something about doing it in this fashion that makes it much more fun than in the base game. You're not micromanaging tediously with terrible UI panels moving slaves around. You're just paying for colonization with your manpower, money, and influence. And that's really all I have the time for in this video. There's also new military traditions. As I mentioned, there's several new laws. I believe there's also some unique missions and decisions and some new formable nations as well. Now on top of that, there's historical events and tribal migration events to add some flavor to the world, and the mod really is an extremely impressive collection of these features and mechanics and ideas. The setting is well realized, and while the UI is a little bit rough around the edges at times, it's really not that much different to the base game's UI anyway, and some of it's actually more impressive than the base game, such as the nice big art backdrops to the territories and the layout of the law screen and religious traditions. So that's it for the video. I highly recommend checking out this mod. It's currently the best overhaul out there for Imperator Rome in my opinion. Thank you very much for watching the video, and if you want more Imperator Rome content, just click that little thumbs up button down there. I hear it does wonders for YouTubers. If you want to get real crazy, you can become a patron of mine and join all of the lovely people on screen now.